Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the newest album from Frank Turner called No Man's Land. So am I the only one who feels like Frank Turner can't really win these days to save his life? And yes, I'm fully aware that a chunk of that statement comes from me being a pretty big fan of the guy. Hell, I was actually kinder to his 2018 album Be More Kind than pretty much everybody. A project balanced on the precipice of hope punk and existential emptiness that sadly didn't have nearly as much of an edge as it really needed to secure that balance. There was a wonky stiffness and cleanness to the production and the delivery that really hampered that project as a whole. And yet throughout the majority of the 2010s, it's been hard for me to shake the feeling that for as much as Frank Turner is trying desperately to do the right thing artistically, he's either stuck chasing past glories or he's facing an increasingly unpleasable audience with sky-high expectations. Hell, most of the time, it's both. And while I've been feeling this to some extent since at least Tape Deck Heart, it really came to bear with the backlash to Be More Kind, where Frank Turner was really trying to provide hope to both his audience and himself, and it didn't seem like he pleased either party. Most because with the exception of the furious and really potent 1933, the songs themselves, they were not his strongest, not by a long shot. So I had to hope that No Man's Land would be able to click this time, but again, it did seem like Frank Turner was setting himself up to fail. A folk rock project full of songs celebrating the famous and forgotten women of history, on the surface, it seemed like a winning idea, and he'd been working on it for some time, even before Be More Kind, especially in this climate with his recruitment of plenty of women behind the scenes to help, but a more cynical, progressive audience already seemed to have their pitchforks on standby for his audacity to tell these stories. Hell, from what I can tell, the backlash to this was even stronger than to Be More Kind. This is his worst reviewed album to date. So yeah, I kind of was expecting the worst of this. And yet, how was No Man's Land? Well, these are always some of the toughest albums for me to review. And no, not just because it's a Frank Turner album and I'm a fan and somehow he's gonna find a way to yank my heartstrings regardless. Although, that is a factor, I might as well admit that right now. No, this is a case of the right intentions and a few inspired, damn near transcendent ideas married to some of his best songs in years, maybe in some of his entire catalog, placed alongside some ideas that are just misfires, missteps, or simply just demanded additional thought to really come together. And while I really want to lean into calling this a great album simply on the benefit of the best songs alone, this might wind up being one of my most critical and biting commentaries on an album that I'm still inclined to recommend. I still think this is really good, just maybe not quite great. And again, this is one of those cases where we have to start with the content because it's the primary focus of Frank Turner returning to the folk sound, and it's easily the most contentious part of this album. And let me begin with a loaded qualifier. Even in this political climate, I'm actually completely okay with Frank Turner writing an album celebrating famous or forgotten women. And while some of their names might be more remembered than most, I mean, there have been plenty of songs written about Sister Rosetta Tharpe before, although I do think Frank Turner is one of the better ones I've heard in some time, he was definitely trying to think outside of the box for this, and I appreciate that. In fact, I'll actually go one further. I have less than zero problem with him tackling historical women who have messy or even murderous pasts. Going back as far as White Lung's masterful 2016 Project Paradise, the divorcing of conventional morality from feminist discourse, it can lead to fascinating conversations of what women might do as recompense for being brutalized in a patriarchal society. And Frank Turner does really take us to that brink with songs like Jinny Bingham's Ghost and A Perfect Wife, the latter telling the story of Nanny Dawes, who kept killing her partners when they didn't meet her standards. It's a really chilling choice then to frame that narrative as possibly being romantic or even sympathetic, especially given that she shows no real remorse here. And even if you think that she deserved to face all those consequences, which, yeah, of course she did, it also raised the question of how societal expectations can warp someone, especially pursuing a relationship. Hell, I'm not even sure I want Frank Turner to put every woman on his stories on a pedestal without showing flaws and failings, because in that case, he'd deserve all the accusations of being patronizing or co-opting all their stories. But that's not saying he evades that criticism entirely, and it comes through both in the writing and execution of a fair few of these songs. And you know what, let's start with the former. Frank, buddy, if you knew you were going to face accusations of co-opting these stories, maybe it would have been a good idea to not write them from a first-person perspective using pronouns like I. I get trying to speak from their perspective to present a more complex and humanizing picture, but this is absolutely a place where if you wanted to do this, you could have brought up female singers to work with you, embody those parts. Hell, not only did both the National and Vampire Weekend do this on their albums this year when they wanted that uniquely feminine perspective, you did some of it yourself on Positive Songs for Negative People with the song Silent Key, which you re-recorded for this album and you took out Esme Patterson. Kind of a shame because I actually might like this arrangement more and she would have been perfect for it. But no, the first person narrative on I Believed You, William Blake, Perfect Wife, The Hymn of Cassiani, even the excellently written standouts of Eye of the Day and The Graveyards of the Outcast Dead, it places your voice in telling those stories over those women, and at least the second pretty messy misstep. Because even if you're not placing women on pedestals entirely, a whole lot of them wind up dead in these stories, where death becomes more of the focus. Again, not inherently a problem, especially when it frames heroism or nurturing protection of those in need, aside a femininity that Frank Turner does realize to excellent effect. But when a solid third of the album focuses on the narratives of these women on their death, specifically for the emotional gut punch, it's a bit of an awkward note, and nowhere does that awkwardness translate more than Rescue Annie, telling the story of forgotten women whose face and model a doctor turned into that of rescue dummies that lifeguards and first aid trainers use, which on the surface is kind of a cute story for how one woman's death taught people how to save countless lives. But if you've got a song that literally translates a woman's agency through death into an inanimate object on your stridently feminist track, it's jarring as hell. And you know what? Here's what's most annoying. Between the obsession with death and the first-person storytelling, Frank Turner still has moments that knock it out of the park, with the best being the fantastic Christmas morning anthem of The Graveyard of the Outcast Dead, setting the birth of London, and then following it with the Lioness and its elevation of the Egyptian pioneering feminist Huda Sha'awari. It's a stellar 1-2 punch midway into the album, even if it does retread some similar ground to Jinny Bingham's Ghost. And then when Frank Turner interweaves these narratives and musical history, the stories are so rich and textured. From Sister Rosetta to Nika, telling the story of a Rothschild heir who sacrificed her fame and a lot of her fortune to boost jazz icons, to even the death of Dora Hand, a nice sad little tune about a famed singer's accidental death in the 1800s. And you know what, it might have been the expected play to do it, but Frank Turner ending the album with a straightforward acoustic song celebrating his mother, it was a really beautiful touch. Kind of predictable, sure, but it's a great way to end off the album. Of course, the other side to all this entire conversation is the actual music that's on display, where, like with Be More Kind, I have to restate what should be kind of obvious at this point. The closest that Frank Turner stays to his abrasive, shouty, folk punk sound with an uncanny knack for huge anthemic hooks, the better his material tends to be. But once again, I get the feeling there's this weird tug-of-war going on across a lot of no man's land between the more ragged folk rock for which he excels and stands out, and the more stately, reserved, polished and sedate, more adult alternative pop rock with more lush instrumentals, but they also feel far less interesting. Most because Frank Turner's earnest singing just does not have the same intensity or character. Sure, I get why there's a sandy, jazzy vibe on Nika, complete with the horns. It fits the subject matter, but you can't tell me it stirs the soul in the same way as the acoustic-driven crescendo strings and jingling bells in The Graveyard of the Outcast Dead, or the ragged grooves scything through the Lioness, or the fast-picked gallop of the folk song Jinny Bingham's Ghost. Hell, I'll even take the brighter, if a shade more conventional folk rock of Sister Rosetta, or the organ and accordion-touched Death of Dora Hand. And I'm also not including songs as stripped back and barren as Eye of the Day, or the first half of Rosemary Jane before the swells of strings come in. There's this homespun, ragged yearning that kind of makes sense there. It goes without polish for its benefit. A similar defense with a jagged buzz that punches up the strings groove on the back half of Silent Key. Again, I like this arrangement. But then you get the weird, off-key post-chorus melody that squonks through a perfect perfect wife, and then Frank Turner attempting a Middle Eastern-inspired vocal line on the hymn of Cassiani, it feels awkward. You know what? No, not even that. It feels half-hearted, an experimental flourish that he just can't sell as effectively as he wants. And these aren't even bad compositions so much as they leave me with the lingering impression that if he had a collaborator who could match his intensity, these could work. Don't get me wrong, Mary Beard's backing vocals, they are there, but she's not really mic'd in a way to really support Frank Turner or really compliment him right at the front. Or maybe it's a production issue. I certainly think Catherine Marks' mix has greater warmth and texture than what Butch Walker gave him, but Walker also gave Frank Turner a much richer backing chorus, and honestly that probably could have helped. And that's the frustrating thing here. From what I understand, Frank Turner has the backing connections that if he wanted to rope in some famous female collaborators to help him tell these stories, instead of working behind and adjacent to him, he could have leveraged that network, and he had the time to do so. But No Man's Land doesn't really do that, and you can tell he's kind of tentative about the project. In the final track, he's questioning his place in the No Man's Land, and seems to have been left with more questions than answers. And as such, the album does feel a little bit compromised. And yet, on the strength of some of these songs, I have to say it's better than Be More Kind, because there is more texture, there's more firepower that's leaked in, and there are fewer missteps. Providing, of course, you don't believe the entire album is a mistake, which I think a lot of people actually do, certainly a lot of the critical press. And that leaves me at a weird crossroads. An unbelievably uneven project balanced between some real missteps and some of the best of Frank Turner's career. Songs made with ambition and the best of intentions, but working more on the strength of Frank Turner's energy and charisma than composition alone. And yet the best of the sum of this album will probably wind up among my top 50 songs of 2019, so what the fuck am I gonna do? And thus, with the dozen plus listens I've given this album, it's getting an extremely strong 7 out of 10. Probably the most critical review I've given to a project scored this highly, but the best moments, they are truly worth it. But in the meantime, look, to some extent, it's already going to be regarded as a curiosity at best, and I expect it to be considered an outlier in his discography. But you know what? It's not a failure. It's worth your time. And when one of the good guys makes it work this far, tries to be an ally as much as he can, even if he gets it kind of wrong in spots, I appreciate the effort. I'll take it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can imagine that for Frank Turner fans, this might be a little contentious. Actually, I'm not sure where this is going to fall. I know that a lot of critics have hated this, but I don't think it's nearly that bad. You want to buy or stream it, links down there below. And I got the poll up there. I'm curious where people are going to fall on this. No, it's not his best, not by a long shot, but it is better than Be More Kind. I'll certainly back that up. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you're looking for the newest episodes of Billboard Breakdown, they are on the second channel, links to which is in the card right over here, as long as the links to subscribe to this channel. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.